Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. We have, mashallah, we are very honored. We have Sheikh Mufti Kamaluddin Ahmed visiting us from the UK. Inshallah, his topic will be the myths and realities of making spiritual progress. Alhamdulillah, Sheikh Mufti Kamaluddin Ahmed is a qualified Islamic scholar and university academic in the field of Islamic studies, specializing in Quran, Hadith, law, history, spirituality, and ethics. He is currently a doctoral fellow in Islamic intellectual history at the University of Oxford, UK. Born and raised in Manhattan, he has a bachelor's degree from the University of Chicago and a master's from the University of Oxford. He also has traveled and spent many years pursuing an intensive full-time study of the classical disciplines of Islamic learning and was awarded formal authorizations as an alim and mufti. For the past 20 years, he has formally guided seekers on the spiritual path, and inshallah we will benefit from his words of wisdom. Jazakullahu Khairun.
Before I begin what I want to say today, inshallah, I'm going to issue one clarification, but it's for myself, it doesn't apply to anybody else. I am actually not a mufti. If you understood what a mufti is, you would understand why I am not a mufti. So the example, and alhamdulillah, I've been successful in England and South Africa and Pakistan that people don't call me mufti. But in America, Allahu Alam, like I'm hardly ever here.
The other microphone has echo for the tilawat. Yeah.
So the reason I want to explain this to you tonight is because a lot of people think I'm saying this out of humility. I'm not saying this out of humility. There's no false humility in our deen. That is called tasannu. That is false artificial humility. So I will explain to you by way of an example very quickly. I am a Mufti course graduate. So there's a law school graduate. A law school graduate, do you call him judge? No. There are some law school graduates who become judges. There's some law school graduates who become professors of law. There's some law school graduates who become lawyers. And there's some law school graduates who never practice law afterwards. I did the Mufti course in 2002, 2003, and for the past 15 years, I have never practiced fatwa once. I've never issued one fatwa in 15 years. Second reason I want to explain this to you is that it was a conscious decision on my part, because to be a mufti, you must remain very well aware and well versed in all of the areas of Islamic law and all of the areas of society and community and family issues that are impacted by those areas of Islamic law. Me, I'm a very selfish person. I'm not actually that interested in every single detail of every single aspect of Islamic law. So I was not academically able to fulfill that role. I will tell you a secret, so to speak. When I was in the Mufti course, so you reach a stage when they actually ask you to start writing fatwas. So where I was studying, they would drop 5 envelopes on your desk in the morning. I would open the 5 envelopes, and if I wasn't interested in the question, I would pass one off here, pass one there, pass one there. And I kept doing this, and my teachers found out, and, well, in our system, when your teachers find out you're doing something like that, so I got in trouble, right? And then I tried to explain to my teacher why I was doing it. I very honestly told him, I'm not interested in this question, I'm interested in these things. He said, well, what are you here for? I said, I just like learning these things, I like reading these things, and instead of researching that question, I'm working. I was in the library, I was reading my own things in fiqh. So he asked me in Urdu, I was translating to answer. He said, "Aap takhassus fil ifta karne aaye, aap takhassus fil fiqh karne aaye, aap kis cheez karne ke liye aaye?" मैंने कहा उस्ताद जी आप जो उसको कह दें मैं उसके लिए करने के लिए आऊँ. He said, have you come here to learn Islamic law and jurisprudence, or you come here to be trained to actually write fatwa? I said, look, I've come for whatever I've come for. What can I do about it? And unfortunately, that bad habit of mine in 2002, 2003 still continues to this day. I do try to serve the community in the field of dawah, and I do try to keep myself, as I said, because if you serve, you have to be well aware. That's why I do try to be aware of issues in theology, in law, in history, in public policy, so I can serve that role in dawah. I do try to serve the community in the area of ilm, which is basic teaching of knowledge, but not necessarily issuing a formal fatwa. And I do try to serve the community in tazkiyah, and that is our topic for tonight, and helping myself and helping others come closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And this will give me the opportunity to make a second clarification, and then we will begin inshallah. But actually these clarifications are a very good beginning. And of themselves, at least the myth and reality part is being covered quite well. In terms of tazkiyah, I am not some king, super specialist, spiritual person. I am trying to survive in the jungle called dunya. There are others who are trying to also survive in the jungle called dunya, and some of us, we realized. So there's a saying in Africa, in the wild, that I learned when I went in one of my trips to Africa. And they say, the Africans say, that if you want to go quickly, go alone, but if you want to go far, go together. And they'd use this, they learned this by watching the herds of animals crossing these vast safari lands that they have. And that those animals who, for whatever reason, wanted to go quickly, they would often end up alone. And then maybe it's the lion or Allahu Alam who would pounce on them. But those animals that wanted to go far, and some of them make very long journeys, not across the whole continent, but hundreds or maybe thousands of miles, they would go together. So for my own survival, I needed some people to be together with me. Some people had this positive opinion of me, that if they were together with me, it will also aid them in their survival. So it's a mutual relationship. This is what Nabi Kareem sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, he said, ad-dinun nasiha. And this is for the ordinary believer. This is not ad-dinun nasiha for the khawas and akhas al-khawas. وَالْأَسْرِ إِنَّ الْإِنسَانَ لَفِي خُسْرٍ. All of you know this incredible surah. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala swears by the waning of time, by the passing of time, if you take it in that sense. Another sense is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is swearing by the immensity of all time, the ages and epochs themselves, and your insignificance in that. How quickly your own individual time will pass. Like if you had those board games, like I get my kids to keep them away from the other type of games. And so there's that small little hourglass, and you flip it over and they have to answer the question. It's like 30 seconds. That small little sand glass, 30 seconds. That's what Asr, your own, even if you live till 100 years old, the passing of your 100 years life is just an instant in the broader framework of this vast thing called time that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has created. So every human being is in what? Khusr. Khusran means absolute, complete, utter, entire loss. It's the only thing that you can use to understand is the concept of a black hole, a complete vacuum from which nothing escapes. That's khusran, absolute, complete loss. Illa alladhina amanu wa amilu salihat. That you have to have iman, and you have to, and this is going to be something I'll be talking about, you have to make amal, you have to do amal, you have to do the work yourself, you have to practice deen yourself. And then وَتَوَاصَوْا بِالْحَقِّ وَتَوَاصَوْا بِالصَّبْرِ. This is for every believer. It's not only for big sheikhs to do. وَتَوَاصَوْا بِالْحَقِّ. That you mutually do wasiyah. you mutually enjoin one another to come on haqq. And then you mutually enjoin one another to endure the difficulties that you will endure while living this survival of the jungle, which is called hayat dunya, our life in this world. So it's only in that niyat that I want to talk to you tonight about this issue of how to come closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and some mistakes I see people making, or some misunderstandings that people have come to have about this path, about coming closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Alhamdulillah wahda wa salatu wa salamu ala man la nabiyya ba'da amma ba'd. Fa'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajeem. Bismillahir rahmanir rahim. Wa dhakkir fa inna dhikra tanfa'ul mu'minin. Sadaqallahu al-azim. Allahumma salli wa sallim wa barik wa arham ala abdika wa rasulik Sayyidina Muhammadin Nabiyil Ummi'i wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. Amma ba'd. The first thing that happens when a person wants to come closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants them to become closer to Him. This is a hidayah from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And this will remain true all the way until we die. So this notion that no, there's some problem, or I'm distant from Allah ta'ala because maybe I don't want it enough. No, the talab does not come from you. The talab is gifted by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as part of His hidayah, and if He gives you tawfiq to act on that talab, you will make some amal and you will make some progress to Him. So the first step and the constant need and the last step is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants you. Now there's a very good news here, that Allah ta'ala always wants every believer to come close to Him. Even the sinning believer, even the extremely sinning believer, even the believer who is doubting their belief, even the non-practicing believer. In fact, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants all of insan, even the non-believer. Allahu Akbar Kabira. Ajib. This is how much Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants humanity. How much Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala loves humanity. Ma gharraka bi rabbikal kareem. Who is that addressed to? Was it Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu? No. Who was it addressed to? All of humanity. Ya ayyuhal insan. Ma gharraka bi rabbikal kareem. That Allah Ta'ala's karam, His generous, infinitely limitless, generous grace comes on every single human being. So even if you're lacking and you're weak in iman, or you're lacking in amal, you're very insaniya, your very humanity. And this is a very important thing, because many mu'mineen, they view that we're mu'min and insan is for the non-believers. No, you're also insan. Every single ayah in Quran about an-nas and al-insan applies to us also. Don't think we have entered some special, unique, distinct category of mu'mineen and we don't have to think about those ayat. Oh, Allah is talking to non-Muslims there. He's talking to us also. And this has saved us. Sometimes just our insaniya has attracted Allah Ta'ala's karam and fadl, His grace and generosity to us. So the first step is that Allah Ta'ala creates through His hidayah a sense of talab, an inkling, a yearning and desire. And it's not even that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala just does that once. Any and every time you pray salah, any and every time you speak the truth for His sake, subhanahu wa ta'ala, any and every time you do any amal, major or minor, easy or difficult in deen, it was all from the karam and fazl of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that He wanted you to do it, He enabled you to do it. Maybe even you did it unconsciously. Allahu Akbar Kabira. This is the beauty of our deen. This is the majesty of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Now what happens in a person's individual journey though, the way they process it and the way they describe it, because that's the way they experienced it, is they feel, and I'm obviously, maybe everything I will say will not speak to everybody, but there's a certain kind of person who tries to make a certain kind of journey on the spiritual path to become closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And the way they conceive of this is that they got this feeling in their hearts, if they accept that first step, to come closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And for a time, they start flying. They start changing. Why? The first thing is that the first thing that a person does when they change is they start praying their salah, they start adopting the fara'id, and they start leaving major sins. And because they're falling in love with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, they're falling in love with Nabi Kareem sallallahu alayhi wasallam. They're falling in love with deen. Deen is an ahmiyah, an importance in their life. So they start doing the big changes. Now, the qurb, the nearness to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that a person gets, but when they make this change from a person who wasn't doing fard to a person who was doing fard, that nearness is irreplaceable, is unmatchable. That leap is not going to occur after you have done the faraiz and wajibat and you try to do something extra. The qurb that is attained through the obligation is vastly more than the closeness to Allah Ta'ala that you get by doing those extra ibadat or extra a'mal. So this is the first thing that you should know, that you may make leaps and you may fly earlier on, but later, actually, there's going to be a more difficult aspect of the journey. It's almost like, you fly in the plane. So I flew from London to Chicago, and then you have to walk in the airport a lot. All right? Now the flying in the plane, you are flying. But once you are done with the flying part, there's going to be a more difficult part. This is what's going to happen on the spiritual path of coming closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Second, parallel to that, is when you first leave a major sin, you will fly. You will say, I was remembering Allah Ta'ala all the time. I was thinking of Allah Ta'ala inside Salah. I was thinking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala while driving. Because you're getting a new sweetness which you have not experienced before. And that's the sweetness of taqwa, of leaving sin for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Just like the first day of Ramadan, you get this sweetness. Just one day. What's one day of fasting? It's nothing. What's it? 12 hours, 14 hours, 16 hours. Now, who gets the sweetness more? I have seen some ulama, now this may sound strange to you, that for them, their life didn't actually change so much in Ramadan. But that doesn't mean that we're more spiritual than them because our lives changed so much. What it means is their lives are already on such a high level of taqwa, so there's not such a big differential for them in terms of their experience. But for ordinary people like me and you, we can think, that Ramadan, Allahu Akbar. Why? Because there's a big differential for us. What was that? It was a taqwa differential. So in Ramadan, we experience taqwa. So this is what happens to a person in the beginning of the spiritual path. They may have left this sin, they may have left that sin, and they start flying to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Again, this is going to be a phase. Then will come a much more difficult test. Well, let me begin with that then, because that is maybe the first thing that we need to work on. So there are some sins that will be easy for us to leave, and there are going to be other sins that are difficult for us to leave, and it's going to be different for different people. There are going to be some sins that you make tawbah of them once. Maybe you were doing it ignorantly for a lifetime. You will make tawbah for it once and you will never ever return back to that sin for the rest of your life. And there are some sins that you will make tawbah for them once and twice and 10 times and 100 times and 1,000 times, and you will still return back to that sin. Allahu Akbar Kabira. You know how few Muslims there are even who can even say this, and I don't want anybody to answer this question, this is between a person and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but how few Muslims there are who can even say that for 1 year they've never missed a salah. Maybe if it's, so they say, well, I overslept 1 day for Fajr because I was really tired. Whatever the reason, they can't even have 1 year like that. Now what type of person is this? This is a person who fully believes in salah, 100% tries to pray salah, prays many salah in the masajid, alhamdulillah, is able to remember Allah Ta'ala inside salah. Look at the list of accomplishments. But they still can't even live 1 year of their life where they didn't miss a single salah. This is what I'm trying to tell you. You will make accomplishments and you will be successful in many things, but that 100% mark is very difficult to get. Extremely difficult to get. That's salah. So you can just imagine then, this salah, you can just think analogically about any other example you want. Did you? So there are some sins that are difficult to leave. Now the myth here, there's a lot of myths that people have in this, misunderstandings about this. First reason is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala did not accept my tawbah. So because Allah ta'ala did not accept my tawbah, now I'm emphasizing certain words. Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala did not accept my tawbah, therefore I'm going back into that sin. A big misunderstanding. I will suggest to you, and there may be some exceptions to this, no doubt, but for 99% of the people, 99% of the time, as soon as you make tawbah, Allah ta'ala accepts your tawbah. As soon as you make tawbah, Allah ta'ala accepts your tawbah. And this is one of those very interesting words in Arabic language, and there's a few of them, where the same word has one meaning for us, and the same word has one meaning for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So At-Tawwab is one of the names of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Tawwabin. And Tawwab can also be used for a human being. So Tawwab is a person, if it's being used for a human being, the word Tawwab is a person who keeps on making tawbah to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And by the way, I want to explain also that for us in this day and age, that normally is understood to be referring to the person who makes sin, makes tawbah, makes sin, makes tawbah, breaks tawbah, makes sin, etc. Originally, Tawwab also meant people who made tawbah once and never returned to that sin, but they kept making tawbah anyway. This is another myth also. That to be tawwab means you will only make multiple tawbah because you repeated that sin multiple times. No. The original understanding of tawwab are those people, they made tawbah once, and the first time they made tawbah, they left that sin entirely. They did never break that tawbah. They did not repeat that sin. But because they were still so ashamed in front of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for the sins that they did, even if 1, 2, 10, 20 years have passed and they haven't broken that tawbah and returned to that sin, they kept on making tawbah to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's the real meaning of tawbah. We understand that in our context because we are people who repeatedly sin, that tawwab means the person who keeps making sin and then keeps making tawbah. And when the word tawwab is used for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, at-tawwab, yatubu, this is the word Allah uses often for a verb he uses for himself. So the closest, there's no real perfect word in English for this, but the closest word I can think of right now is that relenting. Allah ta'ala will relent to you, means he accepts your tawbah. He will relent to you. He will turn towards you. It also has another lexical meaning. He will turn towards you intensely in his relentingness, and he's showering his mercy on you, and he will accept your tawbah. So this is a myth. So not the reason. What's the myth? That we return to sin because Allah Ta'ala did not accept my tawbah because my tawbah was not good enough. Second myth. Your tawbah will never be good enough. You think that you think your tawbah is going to pass on merit? This is another myth people have. And that leads them sometimes when they think they have attained a certain level of merit, whether it's in tawbah or taqwa or zikr or ibadah or ilm or dawah, they think because they've reached a certain standard of merit, they're something. That's for dunya. Merit is for dunya. The path of deen is called adz. Adz means humility, absolute submission to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and acceptance of your complete and total and utter incapacity of doing anything worthy of him. Think, Sayyidina Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, after he would make salah, not every salah, but sometimes after making salah, what would we say? Ya Allah, I have not worshipped you according to your haqq. Not merit. As befits Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's shan and his majesty. So it's not that, so there's no meritorious tawbah. Just making tawbah, however you make tawbah, Allah Ta'ala accepts it because He is at-tawwab, not because of the merit or quality of your tawbah. Yes, in those 1% cases, sometimes it can be an issue of sincerity, right? And that's an issue, and in that case, if you're insincere, then the tawbah is not accepted. Insincerity is almost always only in one way, and that is that you really don't intend to leave the sin. You actually, in fact, fully intend to repeat the sin in your heart and mind, even while outwardly saying the words of tawbah. But even then, Allahu Akbar, even then, the vast majority, Allah Ta'ala still accepts their tawbah. Even then, this is the only thing like that, oh no, I must have been that 1%. It's another myth. No, because I was insincere, Allah Ta'ala didn't accept my tawbah. That 90, I don't know, X, but a vast majority of the time, Allah Ta'ala still accepts the tawbah. Because that's the nature of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's the nature of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So then the question arises, okay, what's the reality then? So that was a myth, that I returned to sin because my tawbah wasn't accepted. So the question then, why do I return to sin? Because you still have a nafs. This was another myth that you thought. I'm not individually addressing you, I'm addressing myself and all of us. Right? We thought, it's just so common to use this method of speaking. If you, when you're making somebody your mukhatab, right? So if I will lapse into that naturally, it's going to be too hard for me to track that. But when I say you, I mean we. Just understand that, all right? So you thought that no, I forgot what I'm saying. Yes. You thought that by making tawbah and leaving the sin, you no longer had the nafs and the desires in the nafs to do that sin. No. That's not what tawbah is. That's called taqwa. Tawbah is something else, taqwa is something else. Tawbah means to truly, really be shameful and never want to repeat that sin again. But that's not taqwa. You still have the full ability to do the sin. Even after the tawbah occurs, the ability, the desire, the inclination, the attraction, the temptation, that hasn't gone away. That's a separate thing. That's called tazkiyah and ultimately taqwa. That's a separate process. And if you didn't realize that, and you thought all you had to do was make tawbah, and you didn't have to do tazkiyah and taqwa, that itself could simply be a reason why you fell back into that sin. Or you made tawbah and you didn't leave the thing that was connecting you to that sin. You couldn't leave that person, or you couldn't stop thinking about that person, or you couldn't stop that greed in your heart for dunya. Well, you gave your nafs material. You gave your nafs some feelings, and that's all the nafs needs. The nafs just needs a few stray thoughts or a few remnant lingering feelings. It's enough for the nafs. It's enough for it to, again, at some point or another, create that burning desire and temptation that a person falls into sin. And you know what happens when people don't realize this? Then you get a very strange and a very difficult and a very complicated situation. And what is that? That the person is doing all those things, good things on deen, and they're sinning also. There are a lot of good Muslims who sin. There are a lot of praying, fasting, Hajj going, Umrah offering Muslims who sin. They're not entirely sinful. They're not mostly sinful. But there's those one or two things that their nafs is still indulging in. The battle against the nafs is something you keep having to fight your whole life. I know people like to think, so okay, let me give you another example. Let me give you my own example. But many of you will also have thought this as well. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in Quran al-Kareem has talked about an-nafsul mutmainna. So there must be some stage where you reach nafsul mutmainna, right? And therefore, anybody who's reached that stage must no longer have these sins. So what I used to think, and many of you used to think, that okay, this is my goal in life. I'm going to reach nafsul mutmainna. There's another myth. There's another myth. This is a bit subtle to explain. This is a bit more ilmi thing. So, Ya ayyatuhan nafsul mutmainna. Right? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is calling out to that soul, that self rather, because soul is normally used for ruh, that self that is mutmainna. What happens at that moment? Irji'i ila rabbiki radiyatan mardiyya. Now some ulama don't, in the majority ulama, majority position is not that the person dies instantly, right? But that can also happen, that when a person has this nafsul mutmainna, Allah Ta'ala calls them back. But rather, what happens is they will die at their ajal, meaning whenever their decreed time is, they will complete their due term on earth. But for the remainder of their time on earth, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is so eagerly yearning and wanting to meet them. All right. But you and me will never ever know this. There is no way, again, it's not a merit basis thing that you can attain nafsul mutmainna due to X number of recitations or X number of mujahada or X number of khidmah or so much amount of dawah. There's no benchmark, no standard for that. So the reality is that everybody should conceive of themselves as always having a nafs that is not mutma'inna, and for 99.999999999% keep adding the 999s. So those of you who know calculus would say the limit of 99.9 with a bar over it, limit of x as it approaches 100, teacher has 100. Means 100% people should just think that they don't have enough nafsul mutmainna. So the myth that happens is when you make some partial success against the nafs, people get deluded to think they have made complete success against the nafs. When you make partial success on even one aspect of the nafs, it doesn't mean you've made complete success on that aspect of the nafs. If you've made partial success, near total success, on even one particular form of sin, on one aspect of nafs, whether it's the desire aspect, the greed aspect, the arrogance aspect, even then you've not achieved 100% success. And if you don't realize that, and if you don't have ajz, you don't humbly acknowledge that, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala can, and this can also be part of His mercy and hidayah, He can afflict you with that very thing that you think that you have passed on merit. This has also happened. It may happen that you think you're free of greed. At some point in your life, Allah Ta'ala Himself will afflict you with greed to put you back in that test. You think you're free of arrogance, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala may Himself afflict you with arrogance. You think you've rid your heart of hatred for other people, Allah Ta'ala may again afflict you with that. It's a very difficult path. Very difficult path. Okay, let me explain this also, because normally we don't really like to publicly tell people it's difficult because then it creates a sense of this is wrong. It's wrong for anyone to hear it. It's wrong to feel a sense of hopelessness when you hear that it's difficult. That's the wrong reaction. When you hear it's difficult, you're supposed to focus your hope more on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Yes, there is a sense you should be hopeless about yourself. But that means that you just put more hope and trust and faith and dua in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Like I said, not everything I will be saying tonight will be necessarily relevant to everyone here. This type of bayan is what I normally, in my own inner terminology, I call it majlis. So there's a difference between bayan and majlis and my own way of practicing speaking and preaching. And that bayan is really just for the most general level of the public and something that is a general topic that is accessible to everyone. And majlis are for those people who are striving and struggling on this path to come closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But many times I also like to break that distinction and not always try to create these concepts and categories. And therefore many times I try to give what I call quote-unquote majlis to a general audience, and many times give general topics to those people who are struggling, seeking and struggling the nearness to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Because even if you may not necessarily understand everything I'm saying tonight, right now in your stage of life, sooner or later at some point in your life you may go through some of these things. And the reason I say this is that because over the past 20 years, a very wide variety of people have come to me with this problem of coming closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's not just the Sufi or the Da'i or the Alim or the Talib or the Imam, an extreme wide variety of people. So then I realized this is something that affects everybody. And so the teachings that the mashayikh and masters of a certain tradition of Islam used to teach maybe to their particular students, those teachings are actually a benefit to everyone. And so there's no reason to separate those teachings out and only teach those things to a very particular select audience. Another delusion on this path, right? Now this is, again, now I have to keep repeating this, it may not apply to everyone, but what happens even for a university student or for a high school student or for a Dar Salam student who starts becoming a bit more practicing, so what sometimes people ask is that, oh, well now my relatives view me as a pious person, or my auntie thinks I'm really neck because I'm a hafiz, or my people at work and my colleagues are asking me to lead Salah, right? And they start getting worried about this. The people are viewing me maybe because of some outward observance of deen or some outward amal on deen, or because I was sharing Islamic talks with them. I wasn't doing that so they would view me as anything. I was just sharing out of my love and concern for them. But now all of a sudden people are turning to me, they're asking me, they're looking to me, they're looking up towards me. So yes, this is something you should be very scared of. This is something I should be very scared of. This is being afraid of this is a very good thing. And the moment you lose your fear of this, it's a very dangerous thing. It's a very slippery slope. So I'll give you an example. So I was in Karachi in Pakistan. So I was trying to explain to some of my older students a particular concept. So I'm going to share that with you, although that maybe has no relevance to any of you tonight, but so you understand what this is. So I told them that there's something called khidmah, and there's something called makhdumiyya. And I told them that I don't want to ever be your makhdum. And so they looked at me and they understand what I was talking about. So I gave them an example. I said, when you have khidmah of someone, when you're of service to someone, that is that you help someone when they're having difficulty doing something. So you help ease that burden. So if I'm carrying a heavy bag, or I'm very tired and maybe carrying a light bag, so somebody sees that, they want to help me, so they would help me carry that bag. But if I'm carrying, I don't have it with me, but sometimes I carry a very small folder which really doesn't weigh more than this paper. If I'm carrying a piece of paper or one folder and you come to me and say, Hazrat, and you try to carry it for me, that's not khidmah, that's makhdumiyya. I invented that word, that's not really a technically proper word in Arabic language. That's making me your makhdum. Let me give you a better example you can understand. Alhamdulillah, I can open the door of the car to myself. If I'm going to sit in your car and you run because you're in a state of panic, that Allah forbid my hand should touch that handle before you're able to open it for me, that's not khidmah. Because that is something I'm easily able to do. If I pick my shoes up in the masjid, right? I said this doesn't apply to you because I know, and alhamdulillah, a lot of you don't have these delusions that you need to be picking up people's shoes and opening the car door for them. But I'm trying to show you something, right? That's another delusion. It's a delusion for us if we accept it, and it's a delusion on your part if you think that that is somehow the relationship you should have with ulama or shuyukh. Your job is to sincerely listen and practice what you are taught. Our job is to sincerely teach it and try to sincerely practice it ourselves. That's it. Sometimes I tell people in Urdu, and this even less of you will understand, Hazrat banna bahut aasan hai. मैं बहुत साल हजरत रहा हूँ. हजरत बनने के लिए कोई मुश्किल नहीं है. मैं थोड़ा सा रोब लगाऊंगा, आपको ज़रा संजीदगी के साथ बात करूँगा, मैं 5 मिनट में आपका हजरत बन जाऊँगा. मैं किसी के शेख बनना वो बहुत मुश्किल काम है. बहुत मुश्किल काम है. It's very easy for me to become this very awe-inspiring figure, which you will feel you have to open that person's, your car door for them and pick their shoes up and be scared and nervous when talking to them. So let me give you an example you can understand. It's very easy to be a harsh and stern father. That's very easy. Very easy for an old man to become stern and harsh as the people are afraid of him. It's very hard to be a father who does true tarbiyah of their children. So I have 4 children. It's very hard to do that. If I want my children to be afraid of me, I can accomplish that in 5 minutes. If I want to do true, real tarbiyah of my children, so that they fall in love with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, They fall in love with akhirah more than dunya. They fall in love with Nabi Kareem sallallahu alaihi wasallam much more, and so that they forget and obliterate any athlete or any other person on this earth. That is very hard. Very hard. Now I think you can all understand what I'm trying to say. There's a lot of myths, misconceptions, misunderstandings on how to get closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Let me tell you something else. Now this is another one of these delicate issues. To a certain extent, and it's very important to understand that, to a certain extent, a person needs external help, external stimuli, what we call sohbah. You need, this is in our deen, this is part of deen. Kunu ma sadiqin is an ayah of Quran. Alright? Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu taqullaha wa kunu ma sadiqin. So no doubt, yes, you need to be in intense, deep company with intensely true, sincere people. But there's some misconception surrounding this concept. First of all, there are many people who may be sadiqeen who you don't realize. Sadiqeen is not only a shaykh tariqat. Let me give you an example from my life. So, like, mashallah, you have Madrasa Dar Salam, you have other madaris in this country. So I studied in Pakistan. I did not actually study in this country, right? Now for me, in fact, sometimes I even meet people who study at very, very good institutions in UK or South Africa. And I think maybe their course of study was actually better than my course of study, because the time I went to Pakistan, you know, some madaris in Pakistan may not be as strategically organized or have such creative thinkers like Mufti Minhaj and Mufti Azim were thinking about curriculum and the way the South African mullahs do it. But there's one thing I got in South Africa, in Pakistan, that no one will be able to get in the US or UK. No one. No one. I'm deliberately going to say, I'm going to load this statement up. No single student of any single darloom in all of US, Canada, and UK can ever get one thing I got in Pakistan. And that was the company of the poor students. They're also a type of sadiqeen. And that I would have never got that company because of being a, you know, American born and raised Pakistani. Gharibon ki jo sohbat, to sit and associate with people who are much poorer than you, and to sit with them not in that relationship that I'm the rich donor who's come to give you your iftar. That's don't delude yourself. That's a certain kind of, alhamdulillah, you should give charity to the poor, and it would be wonderful if you went there and served them the food yourself, but that's a different type of interaction. That's an interaction of donor-donee interaction. When I interacted with the poor students, my fellow students, I was just equal with them. I was their fellow student. There was no relationship, there was no power relationship between us. In fact, many of them were much more intelligent than me. I remember one kid, I used to ask him, because I had not studied that book, but he was so good, I said, Aap mujhe takrar karwaye. How do I explain this? I want you to review, or basically you can just imagine, I want you to teach me this book. Right? Now, when does a guy who's born and raised in Manhattan, has gone to University of Chicago, when in the world would he ever learn anything from a poor person? This is what I got in Pakistan. That's also kunu ma sadiqeen. Let me give you ways you could do this. You know, you have 10, 15 days off. You can, and some of you are Bangladeshi background. You have 10, 15 days off. Fly to Bangladesh, go to the refugee camps, and just play with the Rohingya children. You're not from Bangladesh? Fly to Turkey. Fly to Turkey, and maybe this time, don't just stare at those huge, massive buildings. That there is a certain benefit in learning that Islamic is a civilization. Go to the Syrian refugee camps and play with the children for 10 days. Then you will understand Sohbat al-Sadiqeen. I'll tell you, if you think I'm a sheikh, right? If you spent 10 days with me, or you spent 10 days in the Turkish refugee camp, and the Syrian refugee camp in Turkey, you will much more benefit from spending in your deen and akhirah, and your tazkiyah, and your tarbiyah, and your akhlaq, and your dhikr, and your ibadah, and anything and everything you can think of, if you spend 10 days with those children sitting in the refugee camps. That's also kunu ma sadiqeen. There's a lot of ways to do kunu ma sadiqeen. You may have some elderly widows in this community. You may have You know, I don't know if you have it in America, because in England they do have Syrian refugees, because it was part of this EU, UK. There are a number of, alhamdulillah, I had a chance to meet some. There's a lot more than people think traditionally, right? There are many, many ways to come closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Many, many ways to come closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And in fact, some people have even come and asked me this question, that, you know, I've been on Umrah 5, 6, 7, 8 times, and this time when I went, I didn't feel so much. So yes, you should be terrified. I get scared for myself when I hear that. You should be terrified. And maybe what you should do is next time, maybe, Allah, I'm not giving fatwa, maybe next time instead of going on Umrah, you should spend 10 days with the refugees in Turkey. If something is not working for you to come closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you may have to mix it up. You may have to change it. This is another myth, right? That you have to just stick in one very rigid, narrowly defined method or rubric and just stay in that particular thing. So let me use this to transition to another topic, which is dhikr. So they are basically speaking two types of adhkar. The first type are those adhkar that were practiced and taught by Sayyidina Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. So I'll switch to English, maybe dhikrs and du'as, all right? Second, there's some additional, extra adhkar, zikrs and du'as that were practiced even by some of the tabi'in and tabai tabi'in, and then by later generations. Okay? These are two different types, broadly speaking. All right. Even in the first type, you should try to learn and use different types of zikr of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So I'll give you an example. One method is to take one sentence of istighfar and then make that the literally only sentence of istighfar that you recite 100 times a day for years. Now, if you think about it, that's not really the sunnah way, because Sayyidina Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam recited different sentences of istighfar to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Now, for the beginner who doesn't know that much, for them to even learn one of those sunnah sentences and to recite that regularly is a start. So you should always begin at the beginning. But like anything else in life, if you begin at the beginning and you make a good beginning, you don't stay at the beginning. And it's your duty, and it's also our duty to teach you, and I have done that in entire separate talks. You can hear that on our website. Our duty to teach you, and your duty also to learn and seek and research the different istighfar that Sayyidina Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam recited, and to try to, and there's some in different istighfar in the Quran al-Karim as well, right? And to learn them and to recite different ones. Okay, I'll give you an example. Do you like to eat the same food every day? Can you drink the same beverage every day? Those of you who are a bit more stylish, do you like to wear the same clothing every day? For me, alhamdulillah, it's not an issue. My children always tease me that, Baba, you never need to decide what you want to wear. Because it's just a question of fabric. Some are thinner, some are, Pakistan summer, some is for UK winter. But for those of you who have a bit of a sense of fashion, but I'm not saying it's not permissible, do you wear the same color? Those of you who wear colors, do you wear the same color every day? No. So why is it that you want to? Those of you who are seekers, you view yourself to be seekers on the path to become closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You want to narrow yourself to only using one single recitation or formula every single day. You know what you miss out when you do this? There are different feelings. So I will show you this in istighfar. So for example, Astaghfirullah al-Azim alladhi la ilaha illa huwa al-hayyul qayyum wa atubu ilayh. This is a sentence of istighfar from the authentic sunnah of Sayyidina Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Now what is this? This is a declarative statement in a way. All right? I seek the forgiveness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, astaghfirullah. There's another way of making istighfar, also from the hadith of Nabi Kareem sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Rabbi gfirli wa tubu alayya innaka anta at-tawwabur rahim. This is more like a dua. and that is more like a statement. They're both du'as, but the feel is a little bit different. Now, you may have to know Arabic to feel this, but probably if you looked at the translation, you'll get an idea. There's a different feeling. Let me give you another example of istighfar from Quran. Rabbi inni zalamtu nafsi. That's another feeling. Now, if you were to run with this, yourself, what will happen? The day that you sin, you actually do a sin, you'll naturally want to say this. Rabbi inni zalamtu nafsi. And when there's a day that, in some sense, we sin every day, but when there's a day that you don't consciously sin, you might just make the standard statement, Astaghfirullah la ilaha illallah wa atubu ilayh. You understand? There are different feelings. Different feelings, different meanings, different wordings in the different istighfar. Same thing for the salawat on Nabi Kareem sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. Like I said, this is a longer talk that we have done. Allahumma salli wa sallim wa barik warham. These are different words, they have different meanings, they have different feelings. And there may be, it's not going to happen, it doesn't have to happen every day, but there may come sometimes in your heart, if you knew these feelings, that one day you may feel more like saying salli. One day you may, for some reason, feel more like saying barik. One day you may feel more like saying sallim. This is something that you should try to develop in yourself. Let me give an example of Quran al-Kareem, right? Now, one way to choose which portion of Quran al-Kareem you're going to recite in Salah is simply by length, which 99% people do. So if they have less time, they recite shorter length. If they have more time, they recite of longer length. There's another way to choose. Now, that doesn't require you to master the Arabic language or be hafiz of Quran, but yes, it does require you to understand the meanings of those 20, 30, 40, 50 surahs that you yourself have memorized. Now, if somebody's a hafiz and they're young, it's hard for me to tell them you must learn the meanings of all the Quran. That's going to take a couple of years, and we want them to do that. But if there's somebody who tells me I only know 30 surahs, and the short ones, it's okay, if you only know 30 of the short surahs, that's maybe like 3/4 of a juz or so, and that's a very small amount. You should be able to understand, study, and learn and understand the meanings of those surahs, so that the next time you pray, you can actually choose what to recite in that salah based on how you're feeling and which one of those meanings of those surahs is sort of speaking to you more at that time, or which one would you like to talk to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala through, or which surah would you like to use the means to recite in front of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But people don't think like that. So I covered 3 examples for you, tilawat to Quran inside Salah, but the same could be true for outside Salah. Salawat, istighfar, tahleel, which means to say la ilaha illallah. There are different ways to say that. There are different additions to it, right? La ilaha illa anta subhanaka inni kuntu min adh-dhalimin. La ilaha illallahu wahdahu la sharika lah. There are different ways to say la ilaha illallah. Different additions, different broader sentences. La ilaha illallah itself is only one, right? If you were to learn a little bit about that, again, on different days you would choose to recite different ones. Same for the du'as using the Asma al-Husna. Same for the different sunnah du'as of Nabi Kareem sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. Now all of these are so this was actually a sidetrack, all of these are the sunnah adhkar. Then there's some extra adhkar. Extra adhkar means a sentence or a phrase or a method of zikr that actually was not taught by Sayyidina Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam himself. So first thing you should know, that any and all such methods of zikr will always be given, in terms of the value we assign to them, a lower value than the adhkar that the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam himself recited. So the question arises that why is it that sometimes some sheikhs give some certain of these dhikr to a person to do? The reason they give that is not because it has equal, let alone greater value than the sunnah dhikr. The reason is that they give it temporarily for a particular period of time that they will have to track with you as a form of medicine or therapy or cure. I will explain by use of an example. So just like in the Western world, when you were given medicine, right, that's only for a particular period of time, for a particular reason, until you get cured. So an example of this, could be some, let's say, some type of recitation or some type of slightly out loud zikr or some type of silent zikr. All right? So the golden rule here is number one, is that however much you make that extra zikr because somebody suggested to you that you need that, for what? To remove the ghafla in your heart, to remove the absent-mindedness of Allah Ta'ala in your heart. So sometimes, like with children, we make them do rote memorization. So if there is a child who's reciting Quran al-Kareem and they just can't pronounce that ayah correctly, so what do? We tell them, okay, sit there in the corner and you're going to recite that ayah 50 times and then you're going to come back to me. You're going to just repeat and keep repeating it. But once they learn to recite it properly, you're not going to ask them to repeat it again. And the same thing for those who are memorizing, the same concept. So if there's somebody who says that their heart is entirely absent of the remembrance of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, there were some mashayikh whose experience was that if they made that person sit and practice and focus on the zikr of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's name repeatedly and repetitively, this made that person's heart remember Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Okay? But now, once that person's heart is able to remember Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, they should come right back on tilawat to Quran and sunnah adhkar and nawafil salah, because the goal is accomplished. Now there may be some who need to be kept on, to use the terms of the doctors, a maintenance dose. A maintenance dose. So what happens there when you are on the maintenance dose, then that becomes maybe 10 or 20% of the dhikr that you do. And so 80 to 90% you're doing one of the methods of transmitted zikr. And this is actually there historically in the true mashayikh who taught zikr. But sometimes what you do find in history, and you do find today, is for those people, not for you and me, not as a prescription, but as a description of them, they became so attached themselves to that particular method of zikr because they'd done it so much in their life. So they kept on doing it. That's their own amal. And inshallah, Allah Ta'ala will accept that from them. But that's not for me and you to emulate. What me and you will emulate, that is called the sunnah of Sayyidina Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And I've actually seen this. And this is why historically the Sufi sheikhs used to have this concept that a person should come to them sometimes for 40 days, for 4 months, and can be other time periods. So for a temporary period, they have a deep immersion and they do a lot of extra dhikr. And then when they leave, at best they're given a low maintenance dose, and the rest of the time they're doing sunnah dhikr, extra tilawah, more dua, more nawafil, and more importantly, they're doing the work of deen. Iqamatul deen, ihya'ud deen, be that through dawah, the work of establishing deen, calling people to deen, teaching people deen. This is the model we see historically. So this was a little bit on the correcting some misunderstandings of the path of zikr. Here, like I told you, today was this is another type of talk we give. So we just sit and we have some things that we think that people need to hear. Not everybody will necessarily understand. So let me conclude with maybe one or two very general things. All right? You have to put in your own effort and your own time. So I was talking to you about sohbah being a reality, that you need the external stimuli, but you need to put in your own inner effort. No matter how much external stimuli you get, no matter what wonderful community you can make, no matter how much you restrict yourself to interaction in that community, you have to make your own infiradi, zati, individual amal to come closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And again, if you don't realize this, sometimes, not necessarily, sometimes Allah Ta'ala will test you and pluck you out of whatever it was that you were leaning on or depending on, other than your own effort to come close to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And if you're not ready for that, and if you don't realize that, then again, this will be one of those very difficult, complicated situations where is it hard for us to help a person out of. You have to make your own amal. You have to have your own ta'alluq ma'Allah, your own connection with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Irrespective of any and every teacher you have, irrespective of any and every book that you read, irrespective of any and everything that you teach, irrespective of any and every khidmat of deen that you do. You have to have your own individual ta'alluq with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So for Sayyidina Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, that was his tahajjud salah, his tahajjud du'as, his tahajjud tears. It's the whole experience of tahajjud. And for any one of us, that could be the best way. But maybe because of people's timetables, it's hard for a lot of people to do that. So no problem. If you can't do it at that time, pick a different time. There's another thing also that people don't understand. Let me put it to you this way. If I was to ask you, let's say I could wave a magic wand over you, because sometimes people think I have that ability. If I did, I would. I go, मेरे फूक में इतनी तासीर होती तो मैं क्यों बोलता? मैं बस फूक मारता जाता. मैं पूरी दुनिया में सफर कर फूक मारता जाता. But if you could become a person, I said, imagine about yourself. That imagine if you actually became tahajjud guzar. That you became a person that every single night, in the last third of the night, you spent a full hour praying, reciting, reflecting, crying to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. What type of person do you think you would become? Just think that about yourself. All right? Now what I want to tell you is very simple. Do that in any other hour of the day. Just because you're not able to spend 1 hour of your life like that in the last third of the night does not mean then you should choose not to spend 1 hour of your life like that in the entire 24 hours. So whatever you think you would do and how you would turn to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and how you would be in your ibadah and your zikr, were you to be a person who always rose at the time of tahajjud, do the exact same thing at whatever time is convenient to your schedule and whatever your work, study, life schedule is. Do you understand? Yes, if you want to be technical, you may not get the fazilat and sawab of the time of tahajjud. But believe me, you will get a lot. You will get a lot. If I was to ask you that if you could study Quran al-Kareem, one of the world's greatest, if even such a person exists, right? Hypothetically, the world's greatest mufassir, how hard would you work to take advantage of the opportunity? Okay? You're not going to get that world's greatest mufassir. So any other alim in your area who you have access to and is willing to teach you, you behave yourself with them the same way you would have behaved like that. If I said, what if Imam Bukhari ibn Ta'ala, it's an impossibility, but what if you could learn hadith with him? What would you do? What would you sacrifice? What things would you eliminate from your schedule? Fuzul, wasteful, futile, mindless uses of time. How much and how would you free up your schedule to attend his dars? Whatever your answer to that question is, any local 22-year-old alim, if he's even young, but Allah Ta'ala has blessed him with any level of knowledge of hadith that is even moderately greater than yours, and he's sitting in some masjid, in some musalla, in some academy, institute, darloom, whatever, and he's willing to teach you, is having weekly darsi hadith, you go and take that same talab and adab and sit in front of them and see what happens for you. Because Allah Ta'ala did not give us life in the age of Imam Bukhari. Allah Ta'ala gave you life in the age of, so for you, the direct people in front of me, Allah Ta'ala gave you life in the age of whoever the Chicagoland ulama are. They are your Imam Bukhari, believe me. They are your Shaykh Abdul Qadir Jilani, Rahimahullah Ta'ala, believe me. They are your Imam al-Ghazali. Instead of just sitting there and dreaming about these nostalgic, that's another thing that happened to a lot of us, right? Certainly for me, when I was 19 years old at the University of Chicago, I started reading these things, Imam al-Ghazali, and so I had these, dreams and lofty aspirations. It's a nostalgia. It's a very nice, innocent, sweet, young thing to do. Sheikh Ahmed Zarruq, Rahimahullah Ta'ala, he wrote, this is all maybe 6-7 years ago, I can't remember exactly when he was, and his time, that there are no Kamilin left. Imam al-Ghazali Rahimahullah Ta'ala wrote himself, and that's almost 1,000 years ago now, that finding a Kamil person in this age, he was talking about his age, is more rare than red sulfur. Now, this was an expression in Arabic. But like what you would say in English, like rarer than a blue moon. Hey, someday. So then, if that was the reality 5, 6, 7, 800 years ago, what do you think about it today? Any alim, sheikh, ustad who is on deen, who is on taqwa, who is on sharia to the best of their ability, to the best of your ability to know, who is offering some teaching in your area, you were placed by Allah Ta'ala in your broader taqdeer in this area to be guided by them. You will fly, believe me. You will fly. We need to be more practical, perhaps, than we are idealistic. All right? It's very sweet to have these great ideals. But you know, if you're too sweet, Allahu Akbar. So you should make more ibadah, make more zikr, sit more with ulama, find some other type of sohbah of sadiqeen, be it poor, be it widow, be it orphan. You know, sometimes I'm amazed in Quran al-Kareem. Some places in Quran al-Kareem, Allah Ta'ala just put these two things. La yu'minuna billahi, that they didn't believe in Allah Ta'ala, and they didn't feed the poor. I mean, you would think they didn't believe in Allah Ta'ala, didn't believe in the Prophet ﷺ. They didn't believe in Allah Ta'ala, didn't believe in the Day of Judgment. They didn't believe in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and they didn't feed the poor. Now, feeding the poor is the literal meaning, literally feeding the poor, but it's also just a general teaching for us that there's a lot to be said about khidmah, a lot to be said about service. Maybe for you, it might just be sitting with your elderly parents. There may be other service opportunities of khidmah for you. The importance, the ahmiyah of khidmah. Don't think you're too busy. That no, how can I do khidmah? Don't you know I'm a surgeon? I'm too busy. No, but there's a problem. There is a problem in your life if you're too busy to be of khidmah to someone. There must be someone in your life. No doubt there is an extra special thing of being khidmah to a stranger, like the poor, the orphan, the widow, the refugee, right? But there's also a lot in our deen of being khidmah towards your family, friend, neighbor, community, the one you know. But it cannot be that you're living such a high-paced, fast, busy lifestyle in the US that you are not of khidmah to anyone, whether known or unknown to you. If that's the sacrifice, is that a sacrifice you want to pay for being a surgeon? I'm just as an example, whatever it is that you do, you say, I drive a taxi for 12 hours, driver for 11 hours, driver for 11 and a half hours. That half hour of khidmah that you do will put so much barakah in the 11 and a half hour wages that the 12-hour wages would never have touched that. You have to have some of these things in your life. So obviously it's easier for me living in Pakistan. I don't know, but I know for sure there will be khidmah opportunities here. But I can't practically guide you exactly what that is in America. Everything I told you tonight is actually very, very basic stuff. Very basic stuff. But we're in delusion. We don't do these simple, basic things that are repeated over and over in Quran al-Kareem, over and over by Nabi Kareem sallallahu alaihi wasallam. We instead try to carve out our own esoteric, elite, custom-made path to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. No. There's only one way to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's the same way. Sirat al-Mustaqim. Sirat al-Ladina anamta alayhim. Alladina anam Allahu. Who are those people? Nabiyyin, Siddiqeen, Shuhada, Salihin. There's not going to be some new way for us. There can be some new American way. Hawla wa la quwwata illa billah. So in order to be called as lakir ka fakir. ये भी ना किस लकीर का फ़कीर बनना है, ये भी समझने वाली बात है. ये भी समझने वाली बात है. So I view that there's a great potential for people to come closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So I end where I began, because Allah ta'ala greatly wants us to be close to Him. But This is the asl, this is the bidayah, this is the nihaya, this is the beginning, this is the end. And never lose sight of that. Thus, itni si baat hai. This was you very sweetly coming and listening to me share with you my musings and my reflections on life. After having myself continually struggling to come closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and helping others also try to realize that this is the purpose of our life. We make dua for you, we ask you to make dua for us, and we ask all of us to make dua for our friends, family, neighbors, community, elders, teachers, those who are on the right path, those who may have strayed, those who are far off the mark. Everyone needs our du'as and everybody is worthy of our du'as and we need everybody else's du'as. Wa akhiru da'wana an alhamdulillahi rabbil alamin. अच्छा ये तो जो ये करना चाहिए ये तो हमारे मजलिस के उसूल के तो बिल्कुल मुखालिफ है मगर चलो since I must practice what I preach and so I told you that don't be so rigid in your methodologies because normally I'm very rigid. I don't do the Q&A thing after a bayan. I will give you a chance. So I will allow one person to ask a question, and if I feel that that question has that kind of adab and ikhlas that is appropriate to this type of gathering, then I feel confident that okay, this is a time where you can ask your questions. But my experience is very rare. Q&A is a different thing. I do that with the students like I did last time. We do that when we are in the academy or the university. Masjid mein 99% Q&A chalta nahi hai. Just trust me, I've done it much more than you. Yeah, you may not understand why, and you may be thinking, and because we do actually offer those other ways that people, I'm happy to sit back after Isha, and people can come and ask whatever they want. But I think right now, if we make a bit of dua, and then we call adhan, and we pray some sunnahs, and make some more dua, and we pray Isha Salah, that'd be maybe a better way to spend the next 15, 20 minutes of our life together, inshallah. Subhanallah min ala Muhammad, Allahumma salli ala Sayyidina Muhammad, wa ala ali Sayyidina Muhammad wa barik wa sallim. Rabbana dhalamna anfusana wa illam takfir lana wa tarhamna lanakunanna min al-khasirin. La ilaha illa anta subhanaka inni kuntu min al-dhalimin. Rabbi ighfir warham wa anta khairur rahimin. Ya Allah, Ya Rabbi Kareem, Ya Allah, you gave us so much hidayah, have already sent so much of your rahmah on us. You have showered us with so much of your fazl and karam. You gave us the gift of iman, tawfiq of Islam. You gave us tawfiq to pray salah, to enter into a masjid, to lower our head and bow in front of you, to press our forehead on the ground to you, to recite your kalama, your Quran, your dua. Yet we are drowning in your limitless spiritual blessings. But yet we are still needy, we are still muhtaj, we are still fakir. Yet we ask that you send your relenting, merciful forgiveness upon us. Forgive us for all the sins that we did. Forgive us for the mistakes that we have done. Forgive us for the people that we hurt. Forgive us for the delusions that we have. Forgive us for all of our failures, Ya Rabb, to live up to your right over us, to live up to the beautiful expectations of Nabi Kareem sallallahu alaihi wasallam on his ummah. Ya Rabb, to fulfill the rights of our family members, to fulfill the rights of our friends and neighbors and teachers and students, Ya Rabbi Kareem. Ya Rabbi, ask that you make us muttaqeen mu'mineen, salihin mu'mineen, dhakirin mu'mineen, mukhlasin mu'mineen, your muqarrabeen mu'mineen. Ya Rabbi, ask that you take us out from the wasteful pursuits of our life. Grant us from your fazl and karam tawfiq, Ya Rab, to do qadr of our time, to value our time, to value our communities, to value those ulama, to value the imams, and for us to value the community members, to value the seekers, to value the students. Ya Rab, grant us more qadr of one another, Ya Rabbi Kareem. Ya Rab, we are grateful that you put in our heart qadr for Nabi Kareem sallallahu alayhi wasallam, Sahaba kiram, mufassirun, muhaddithun, fuqaha, usuliyun. But Ya Allah, we ask that you increase the qadr in our heart for our local friends, for our local families, for our local communities, for our local leaders, for our local children, for our local youth. Ya Rabbi Kareem, we are needy of you, needy of your hidayah, needy of your rahmah, needy of your maghfirah. Ya Rabbi Kareem, give us tawfiq to be firm and regular in our salah. Give us tawfiq to be regular in our recitation of Quran. Give us tawfiq to make use of every sunnah zikr, to feel every sunnah feeling, to have every sunnah attribute, to perform every sunnah khidmah, to have every sunnah character of our beloved Nabi Kareem sallallahu alayhi wasallam. Accept us to do dawah of deen and the way of Sahaba Ikram radiyallahu ta'ala an majma'in. Grant us the hikmah of the Khulafai Rashidun, Ya Rabbi Kareem. Ya Allah, put an ittihad in our heart, muhabbat between our hearts, love and respect between our hearts. Ya Rabbi Kareem, save us from every shar, from every fitna, from every fasad, from every evil, from every trial, from every difficulty, from every delusion. Ya Rabbi Kareem, we are weak, Ya Rabb. We are too weak to survive in this age of fitna, in this age of trial. Help us, Ya Rabbi Kareem. Make us strong in iman, strong in amal, strong in akhlaq, strong in our yaqeen. Ya Allah, Ya Rabbi Kareem, we ask that you accept and honor the du'as of the people in their hearts, the du'as they profess in their tongue, the du'as they secretly ask in their heart. Ya Rabbi, you're a'lam, you know best what we need. We ask that you guide us out of your infinite ilm, your infinite hidayah, your infinite rahmah. Grant us much better than anything we could have imagined and anything that we could have prayed, and make us strong in deen, steadfast in deen, make us mazboot on deen, grant us istiqamat on deen. Ya Allah, Ya Rabbi Kareem, and we make dua for the ummah, Ya Rabb, the yatim, the orphans of the ummah, the poor of the ummah, the miskeen of the ummah, the refugees and homeless and stateless of the ummah, for the oppressed of the ummah. Ya Rabbi Kareem, we ask that you remove all the Mazlumeen from their Mazlumiyah. We ask that you rad of the zalim from your own quwwah and qudra. Ya Rabbi, we ask that you give us the tawfiq to spend our time and our heart and our emotions and not just our money, Ya Rabb, in the khidmat of the poor and the needy of the ummah. Help us, Ya Rabb. Give us sense, Ya Rabb. Make us realize, Ya Rabb. Give us hiss, Ya Rabb. Ya Rabb, take us away from becoming behis. Take us away from becoming so insensitive, Ya Rabb. Let us be sensitive and soft and kind to one another. Ya Rabbi Kareem, send your khas rahmah on the ummah, khas maghfirah on the ummah. Few may be still left, but so many have returned from Hajj. So many are still returning from Hajj. Accept all the du'as they made, all the du'as they continue to make. Make each and every returning Haji a nur in their home, a nur in their community, a beacon of light for this ummah, Ya Rabbi Kareem. And give all of us tawfiq, Ya Rabb, to fast again in Ramadan, to visit in Haramain Sharifain and Umrah and Hajj again, to perform these noble acts of ibadat, Ya Rabbi Kareem, from your karam and fazl, bi'idhnika Ya Rabbi Kareem. ربنا تقبل منا إنك أنت السميع العليم وتب علينا إنك أنت التواب الرحيم وصلى الله تعالى على حبيبه سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين.
الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر الله